don't know if you normally do.
And thanks for reminding me. I appreciate that.
There we go. Excellent. Well, thank you, Jen, for being our technical director for today and for our learning webinar that we have on the great topic of registered apprenticeship programs. My name is Allison Grealis. I am the president and founder of the Women in Manufacturing Association and Education Foundation. And we are thrilled to have some time today to talk to Cheryl Thompson about her experience as both a leader in industry and as well her experience as a past apprentice in the manufacturing industry and automotive space. Today's discussion is part of a series that we are doing year-round to illuminate the importance of registered apprenticeship programs and as well the importance of diversity in registered apprenticeship programs in manufacturing. We work with Jobs for the Future on this initiative as an outreach partner, and we hope throughout the course of our work and our awareness activities that we're able to attract more women into registered apprenticeship programs year-round. So we're thrilled to have with us as a special guest today, Cheryl Thompson. She has been a longtime supporter of the Women in Manufacturing Association, and again, thrilled to share her story. Cheryl was first introduced, I think, to our association many years ago at our Women in Manufacturing Southern Conference, which is one of the regional conferences that our association produces. And it was great to get introduced to Cheryl, and her story was very inspiring. She is the founder and CEO of the Center for Automotive Diversity, Inclusion, and Advancement, CADIA, and she has more than 30 years experience at Ford Motor Company and American Axle and Manufacturing. And she first started her career as a tool and die apprentice. She did rise and work her way up to global leadership at Ford Motor Company before creating CADIA in 2017. And her organization provides year-round access to diversity, equity, and inclusion tools, networks, insights, and practical advice to companies in the automobility space. So please help me in welcoming Cheryl Thompson to today's conversation. Welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you, Allison. Really thrilled to be with everyone and to talk about my apprenticeship. It's been a hot minute since I've been able to talk about it. So I loved my apprenticeship program so much so that I went through some old pictures and I put together a little slide deck to kind of tell the story and let you know a little bit about what the apprenticeship was all about, what some of the challenges were, and then we can certainly go into some questions and then hopefully get some great questions from the participants joining us today. So let me share my screen and get the PowerPoint up. All right, there we go. So as Allison said, running CADIA now, Center for Automotive Diversity, Inclusion, and Advancement. And so we're working with individuals and companies in advancing talent in a diverse, inclusive, and equitable way. But I wanted to go back about 30 plus years and let you know where this all started. So this is me in high school in the 80s. You can tell from the feathered hair. If anyone knows anything about the 80s, lots of feathered hair. And I used sun-in. My hair is a little brassy. But that was my senior picture. And at the time I had plans to go to college. I was raised with this whole idea of get a college degree and do something that's going to make a lot of money. And I was all set to do something with computers. Computers were new. It was the next big thing. And I wanted to be a systems analyst. Was all enrolled in Grand Valley State College. I actually graduated early from high school. I had a lot of extra credits, so I graduated early, got a start in a community college. It was Oakland Community College. And then life happened. So I ended up, I was pregnant at 17 and ended up having my son at 18. And that is my son, and his father did not stay with his father. So I was a single mom. And so I like to call my son that unexpected blessing. And he is 37 right now and living in Denver, and he is a chef. So he took the culinary path. Couldn't get him into manufacturing, sadly. He started off a little bit with metallurgy and then found out that he wanted to work with food instead. So he is off in Denver on his own doing that. So as you can imagine, it was challenging being a single mom, trying to figure out how I was going to make it, how I was going to be able to raise him. And so I think I was doing the gig economy back in the 80s before the gig economy was even a thing. And I had 5 different jobs at one time. So I had several waitressing jobs, and this is me having to waitress on Halloween night, and my younger sister had to take my son out trick-or-treating. I think the restaurant I was working at was Benji's. It was a seafood restaurant. I was sewing napkins. So I would get material and I had a pattern and I would sew napkins and send them back into someone. I was also delivering newspapers. I had an adult motor route, which was very challenging because I got car sick. So that was a trip. And then I was also sewing these appliques on sweaters. Same type of a thing through the mail. They would send me these sweaters and I would sew on these, the bling. And so because I was waitressing, my dad was an engineer at Ford Motor Company. And he said, you know, if you're going to waitress, why not apply at Ford Motor Company? If they will likely pay for your benefits, your health care, maybe they'll pay for your school. And I thought, oh, you're crazy. Ford is never going to hire me. And my mom drove me to the front of world headquarters, dropped me off in the front of the building, and I went in and I applied. And again, back in the 80s, I'm wearing a gray suit, pantyhose, and I go in, fill out the application, and they came back out and they said, can you start right now? Like they handed me an apron, and there I was in the basement of world headquarters, washing dishes in my heels and in my gray suit. So fortunately, I didn't have to stay in the dish room long. I got promoted to be a waitress. I also waitressed in the executive dining room in the penthouse. And this is me with some of my coworkers. And they, at the time, and this is probably in '89, they were looking to recruit women and minorities into the skilled trades. And I was thrilled because that meant I was not going to have to work 5 jobs anymore. I was only going to have to work 1 job because the pay was phenomenal compared to what I was earning as a waitress. I also knew I was going to have benefits, but I thought I was going to be an electrician or a pipe fitter. And I knew what that was. Layoffs were quite common in those days. And I thought if I ever got laid off, I will be able to work on the outside. Well, they wanted me to go into tool and die. And I had no idea what tool and die was. I thought I was going to make tools and dye them. No clue. So I show up on my first day and I get paired with Archie. Archie's over here to the right. This was Bill Postlewaite, my superintendent. And Archie hands me this tool bit and he said, here, go sharpen this tool bit. Well, I was, as you can imagine, had no exposure to the manufacturing environment. I'm looking at this tool bit and thinking, what in the heck, and what, sharpen it to do what? Well, my first machine that they put me on was a shaping machine. And this is very similar to the shaping machine that I worked on. And I'm just going to show like a quick clip here so you can see what the shaping machine does. You can see it's hogging out large amounts of metal. So it was really important to have that tool bit sharpened the right way. So that's kind of how it started off. This was a 4-year apprenticeship program. And I'm going to just highlight some of the journeymen that I worked with, journeywomen that actually, it was all journeymen at the time, no journeywomen yet. So this picture right here is of a team that was trying to teach me how to read prints. So this is very early in my apprenticeship. And this guy here in the center, his name was Bernie. And Bernie went through the original Henry Ford trade school, which was really interesting to hear just about Henry Ford and his dedication to manufacturing and giving everybody a trade. So I just learned so much from Bernie and loved hearing his stories. I also got to work with some journeymen who came over from other countries. So this is Helmut, and he did his apprenticeship in Germany. And that was a really hardcore apprenticeship. Like they taught metal removal with a block of steel and a file. And they said, here you go. Gave them a print and said, we want you to file this block down to these dimensions. So learned a ton from Helmut, and Helmut was a lot of fun. And then these were some of the guys. And I say one of the guys because the person over to the right here, his name was Al. I can remember Al saying to me one time, yeah, you know, Joe, his locker is right next to mine. So they kind of just forgot that I was a female and, you know, assumed that, you know, I was right in their locker room. And then Geza was from Hungary, and he was a lathe on the Wizard, and I became really good at the lathe, just learning everything from Geza. He was amazing. And then this is one of those plant tours. We had some funding to rehab some of our equipment. So this is me showing off the new rehab drill press to the person who approved the budget, who was Dale McKeon back in the days. And then Pam. So Pam was another apprentice. There were not very many women going through the apprenticeship back in those days. And I call Pam my very first mentor before I even knew what a mentor was. So as you can imagine, I was quite overwhelmed, I guess, you know, walking into this factory. It was the Rouge complex. I had no idea what manufacturing was all about, a little intimidated working with all of these men. And Pam really taught me to open up and to be approachable. You know, her early counseling was, you want these guys to help you, you need to appear approachable. So my tendency was maybe to be in my shell. And you can see she's got this big smile on her face. She had just gotten done with Dale Carnegie training. She had a long time career at Ford on the assembly line and also spent some time on the railroad. So Pam was really instrumental in my early days at the Dearborn stamping plant, helping me get settled and really, you know, I guess acclimate to the culture, to the environment. So lots of fun times. Over on the left, you can see there were some other women going through the apprenticeship with me, and we were spread all throughout the Rouge complex. So at any given time, there may be one or two of us in the same plant, but often it was, you know, we were the only in the whole plant going through the apprenticeship program. That's us at a picnic. So you can see there's a ton of camaraderie. There were these picnics that would happen for team building. This is us out for drinks. And then you can see me just catching a quite quick bite to eat at lunch. And evidence that I did work, you can see my coveralls are quite greasy there. So fun times during my apprenticeship program. And just to give you a little feel for what that apprenticeship program consisted of, it was 8,000 hours of classroom and on-the-job training. And I had to get so many hours in tool making and die tryout and die making, and then a certain number of hours on all of the different machines here that you see listed. And I still have my books, and they are phenomenal. I mean, they are the how-to of how to be a tool maker, a die maker. And you can see an example here of all of the tasks that I had to do to prove my capability, my competence in each of these areas. So I ended up with my 4-year certificate that said I completed the tool and die apprenticeship. And soon after being a journey woman, a journey person for a couple of years, there was a superintendent, and I call him the OG, the original sponsor, before I even really knew what a sponsor was. His name was Smitty. And Smitty took me aside and said, you know, a lot of die makers have gone into engineering. Have you ever considered a career in engineering? And to be honest, I had not. I didn't think that, you know, I thought it took years and years of going to engineering school to become an engineer. So he opened up me to the idea that I could be an engineer, exposed me to his network. I went on a couple of interviews and soon had a position on the vehicle side, building the Taurus and the Sable vehicle. So back in the early 90s. So that's how I made the transition. And now just a few of my career highlights. As Allison said, long career at Ford Motor Company, spent time in vehicle, in powertrain, retired leading all of powertrain prototype. And I also spent 1.5 years at American Axle and was their global prototype director. And on top of my day job, very committed to professional development, diversity and inclusion, took a lot of different leadership courses. So lifelong learning has always been a passion of mine, and I continue that today in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you can see different pictures here of me beyond the apprenticeship program. And now what we do at CADIA, we really support companies who are looking to accelerate their progress. We pride ourselves in having a peer learning community and offer a number of different solutions for the industry. And one of the things when I'm doing my DEI training is I teach people to develop their diversity story. So you can see the fact that I served an apprenticeship and loved my apprenticeship is very integral in my diversity story. And recently I found out that I was a fourth generation auto worker. I found my great grandfather's draft card from 1913, and he was a punch press operator at Ford Motor Company. So it's like full circle because he was operating a press, and later, little did I know I would be making the dies that went inside of those presses. So that is my story, and happy to open it up, Allison, to have a discussion.
Excellent. Well, Cheryl, I think that was a great presentation. And I think hearing your story hopefully has inspired maybe some other listeners today to today's presentation about how a registered apprenticeship program might work for either themselves individually or their company to provide a new pathway or opportunity for someone to rise in an organization, to have financial security, to be able to support their family. So again, a great presentation. As you talk about how you kind of rose at your organization and how you first got introduced to the Registered Apprenticeship Program, what would you say would be some of the kind of challenges you faced initially? And then as well, how did you overcome some of those when you first got started in the Registered Apprenticeship Program?
Yeah, well, it was interesting. As I mentioned, I had no idea what this apprenticeship program was all about. They mailed a letter to my house. And I remember showing it to my dad, and he's like, "Oh, you got to do this. This is amazing. You have to do this." So he was the one that really pushed me into it. I had no idea. And I didn't know what I didn't know, Allison. Now I can imagine it'd be a little intimidating to walk into an environment like that if you were female, but I think it was just naivety. I had no idea what I was walking into. So I think some of the challenges were just being looked at like I was going to be a challenge. I think one of the first bosses I had told me that he was concerned I was going to be a distraction to the men. And he said, "Listen, if anyone's here talking to you for longer than a minute, I'm going to shoo them away." So I think that was just the unconscious bias, the conscious bias in some cases, right? I was once told I was taking away a man's paycheck. I think that was the biggest challenge. But other than that, it was just a great experience. Had a lot of support, and I think the sky's the limit. I was able to learn whatever I set my mind to, whatever I raised my hand for. I was never turned away for an opportunity to learn.
That's excellent. And because you stayed in manufacturing and obviously rose in your career at Ford Motor Company and then American Axle, did you see a significant shift in the culture in manufacturing? Did you see an inclusivity improvement from the time you first started as an apprentice to present day when you were a leader?
Oh my goodness, absolutely, absolutely. As you can imagine, there was some catcalling, that type of behavior in a factory, and thankfully that is no longer tolerated. I can remember, just walking. I think one of the HR leaders walked me around the plant because he was concerned about some of the calendars that the guys had on their toolboxes, right, back in those days. And he was trying to do the right thing, but he walked me around the plant, and we had to go like calendar by calendar, pin up by pin up, and he would say, "Does this offend you? Does this offend you?" Right? So that is how it started off. I would say today, number one, the culture is so much better because that type of behavior, that type of environment is no longer tolerated. And number two, it is not as dark and dingy and dangerous as it once was, right? The factories now are so much different than they were, right? They're more safe and they're more clean. There's so much more standardization. And some of that, I guess more of the, what's the word I'm looking for? More of that work that requires heavy lifting and all of that. They have come up with technology and ways to work around that. So, so much different. The culture is so much different.
I think definitely, at least from what I've seen, and granted, I'm not directly manufacturing, but I've toured many manufacturing facilities, and just on my tours, how they've changed since 22 years ago when I started working with manufacturing trade associations to present day. And I got to see some of those lovely calendars as well. And those were lovely.
Lovely. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
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 So there's a few questions popping up here in the chat. And one of the first is, thank you so much. Do you think other female coworkers had the same type of support as you had?
That's a great question. I don't think so. I think that I was so thankful for Pam, the one that I showed you was my mentor, because she had been in that environment for a really long time. And she gave me that advice about being open, being approachable, so that those guys would accept me. I can remember there was one female that ended up going back to her job because she was a beautiful woman, and the guys were a little rough on her. I mean, she got hit on a lot, and they would just blame it on the way she was dressed, right? So it did take a little bit of learning to work in that environment. So I just think I was lucky and having somebody show me the ropes so that I could fit into that environment. So I think most women did, but there were a few women that did not get the support I got.
Another question here from someone who's in our audience today who mentions, I direct a technical apprenticeship program for BASF with special emphasis on hiring female technicians. We've had some female technicians say that they have had a hard time being heard by supervisors and speaking up for themselves. Would you recommend training in assertiveness?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wish I would have had that. I can remember I was pretty assertive myself because I was young and I didn't know what I didn't know yet. But I can remember sometimes getting put on jobs that I felt like were like busy work, like mounting wear plates or drilling holes, when I knew there were more challenging things to learn. So I always would kind of push back and say, listen, this is my apprenticeship and I only have 4 years to learn all of this stuff. And I need you to give me new things to learn. I can't be always, mounting wear plates. Granted, that work needed to be done, but I didn't want to be the one doing it all the time. And I would say that anytime I had an issue with a supervisor, I would just go to the superintendent, the person above him. Don't know if that was politically correct or not, but early in my career, it didn't matter. I was just there to learn, and I wanted to learn as much as I can. So yes, I think assertiveness training should be offered. Absolutely.
And there's another question here about recommendations if a company who might be listening today does not have a apprenticeship program and they're interested in starting one. What advice might you give them or recommendations?
Well, I would say get with your government officials, others who have started apprenticeships and understand how to get one started. But I would say it's a great investment. And if you're wondering if you should do it, you should. I mean, talent right now is so hard to find. So it's best to grow your own talent. And you see, I was there at that company for over 30 years. I was extremely loyal. Like, they developed me. And as a result, I was able to give them back quite a bit. So it was a mutual relationship. So I would say absolutely start an apprenticeship. It's a great way to grow and develop your own talent and to build that loyalty.
You mentioned as well, that you were a single mom and that your son now, has flourished. He's 37 years old, and, you lived through kind of early manufacturing career, raising a family. supporting yourself and your son. We have heard from lots of members about their challenges as working moms, and specifically about the unique challenges of single moms. So I think you spoke a little bit about it, but any further illumination on how this registered apprenticeship program really impacted you as a single mom and provided you perhaps, again, financial support, stability, those things. How is that a good fit for you?
Yeah, well, I mentioned, the salary alone was able to take me from 5 jobs to 1 job. I had friends who were going to college as I was going through my apprenticeship. They walked away with debt. I did not walk away with any debt. So not only was I getting an hourly wage, I was getting my school paid for. So when I finished my apprenticeship, I only had to take, I think it was 6 more courses or 6 more credits. I don't remember which one now to finish my associate degree. Not only did they pay for my school, they paid for my hours in school. They also paid for, I got a tool check every, I don't know if it was every quarter or every 6 months. So there was just a ton of support that helped me raise my family and hire childcare. And then the other thing, where I worked, you had to switch shifts every 6 weeks. So every 6 weeks you would be moving from days to afternoons. So as a single mother, that was extremely hard for me, having that childcare. So I was able to get an exception to stay on afternoons so that I didn't have to rotate back and forth. And were there people saying, oh, she's getting special treatment? Yes. But I, really focused on what I needed to do for my family and didn't let that bother me. So yeah, it was extremely helpful for me in raising my family as a single mom. It gave me the means to hire the support that I needed and to, have a nice place to live and put them in good schools.
So you talked about Pam, your early mentor, and other people that were supporters of you along the way as you were an apprentice, and I'm sure as well as you grew in your career. What was some of the best advice you received as an apprentice?
The best advice I received was to learn everything I could. I think that's why I was so adamant about making sure I got the right amount of hours in all of those different areas I was supposed to get hours in. I guess to take initiative. That was a big thing. And I think that work ethic that I learned in my apprenticeship has served me to today, just not being afraid to learn, figuring things out, knowing I can do anything. I mean, the power that you get from knowing how to build something, knowing how to fix something, and later going into engineering, knowing like I could make that thing that's on the print, no one can take that away from you. So I just think that gave me a lot of inner power, and having that certificate at the end of the day, no one can take that away from you. In fact, when I first got into engineering, it was I don't tell this story very often, but it was very challenging for me to move from being a die maker, where I knew what my job was every day, and I could forget it at the end of the day, right? I had a set of prints, I would get assigned a job every day, and I would know what my job was. Moving into engineering, completely different mindset. There was that to-do list that never ended. And I just felt very stressed out about it. And I ended up going back to my tool and die, journey person days for, another couple of years before I actually went back into engineering. So just, no one learn that skill and no one can take it away from you.
We hear that a lot from people who have participated in and or going through registered apprenticeship programs, those portable skills that they have. Those skills that they know, even if they advance into engineering or a different role, they know they can make things, that they know
Yes.
that they have that ability and that wherewithal and that expertise, which
Yes.
is really important and very valuable.
Absolutely.
So when you were an apprentice, did you experience self-doubt, imposter syndrome? Did you get concerned, especially because you were just one of just a few women who were in the program? Did you feel some insecurity along the way?
Yes. I could, so that video I showed of the shaper machine, I was setting that up one time to, like for a compound angle. So I had the table all loosened and I was moving it and all that. And when I was putting everything back together, I forgot to tighten that table. And so that head was coming through, going to take a cut of the workpiece that was sitting in that vise. And that vise went zoop, and it almost fell off that table it was sitting on. And I looked over, and there was this guy running a G&L machine, up on this big ladder, and he was sitting in his chair, and he just went like this, right? He's just shaking his head, didn't come over to help me, but was completely judging me. And it was like, I had that realization, like, oh, everybody's watching me, right? Everybody's looking at me. So I think it was then I started to be just a little bit more self-conscious, and I did have that self-doubt because, first of all, you never know what job you're going to get. So especially early on in my apprenticeship, there was just always this, like, I want to prove that I can do it. I don't want people giving me that judgy look. And so, yeah, there was definitely a lot of self-doubt until I got a little bit more experience. I think that, all the way through my apprenticeship, probably about 6 months into being a journey person, I had that self-doubt, but it subsided a little bit once I got more experience and just, built relationships with people that could help me. You're never going to know how to do everything, but if you have those relationships and can call on people to help you out, you'll be fine.
So what lessons would you say that you learned during your apprenticeship program that have stuck with you for life and that you still kind of hold on to today?
Experience and knowledge go such a long way. So the thing that sticks in my mind is working with a very experienced journey person versus working with someone who was newer, graduating from the program. So I'll never forget, this guy's name was Aldo, and he was a newer journey person. I was working with him, and it felt like he was running around all the time. Like he was just making all of these moves, and he was running and just working really hard versus working with a very experienced journey person. Very little effort, but the outcome was so much greater. So there was something special there going on with that wisdom, experience, and just that calm demeanor. So and this guy, I don't remember his name. I think his name was Bob, and he looked like Gerald Ford. So whenever I get stressed out, I just think about him and he always used to do this, slow down, right? Just one step at a time and just make every move count. Every move counts. So that was my biggest lesson, and I still think about that today.
Make every move count. That's really important. And I think, there's such an opportunity at women in facilities present day. If you think about the large number of very experienced people retiring,
Yes.
there's so much knowledge there. And, sadly, a lot of it isn't being transferred or translated to others before they leave. So, I think a piece of encouragement from Cheryl's remarks is to connect with some of those very knowledgeable veteran people on your plant floors in your facilities, to learn from them direct. That, there's lots of expertise there that we hope doesn't, I think, go along with them as they retire. Hopefully that expertise doesn't leave the company.
Yeah, that expertise is so untapped at times. I think that's another really important thing that I learned, a lesson that I learned is asking the people who are closest to the job. So often I would see like a job that was down and all of the white shirts running around trying to figure out how to fix it. And I would, in my apprentice days or my journeyman days, I'd be sitting there with the die maker and they would just be like, yep, I know how to fix that, but nobody asked me, right? And so that taught me to, get to the person who's closest to the job. And that knowledge transfer, you're right, that we're going to lose all of that knowledge unless there's that exchange of information. And I'm so excited to see people talking about and considering apprenticeships because it's just invaluable, that knowledge that gets passed from person to person. I look at Europe and I know I think they have a lot more apprenticeships than we do. They've always had them. And just a great way to build a sustainable workforce.
So if you were to talk to your younger self Is there anything that you would have told your younger self, and or those that impacted you when you were an early career apprentice? Different advice you would give to your instructors or yourself if you were to travel back in time?
Oh, wow. Well, to myself, I would say be patient. You don't have to learn everything all in one week. I was a little crazy back then, trying to learn as much as I could. So I would just tell myself to be patient and don't worry. You think everyone's looking at you, but they're really not. Everyone's got their own thing that they're concerned about, right? No one's really worrying about me. So that's a lesson I would tell myself, or the message I would give myself. To my instructors, I had a variety of instructors, both in school, in the classroom, and on the shop floor. My advice for them would just be more open-minded, because I did feel there was just a lot of bias going on. There was a lot of adjusting of expectations because I was female, right? They would assume that I couldn't do anything because of the way I looked, or because I was female. And I don't think I got challenged enough. I think maybe that's the other reason, Allison, I was a little bit more assertive in wanting to learn things, because I felt like sometimes I was coddled, and I could see that happening because of that unconscious bias going on.
Yeah, I think sadly that still happens a lot, that people think that they need to give special treatment to kind of females and maybe some of these more male traditional roles. And I think that's great advice that you would give future instructors. And maybe there's some instructors even listening today who maybe would be impacted by that. So thanks for sharing that. As you look at future generations now of women who either you got to manage or lead at American Axle or Ford, what are the things that you've given them as advice as they navigate their careers, whether as an apprentice or just generally as a professional in manufacturing?
Learn everything that you can. Say yes and then figure it out later. And push yourself. I did for periods of time in my career, I did let myself be coddled. I did work for people who had low expectations, and unfortunately, I aligned with those expectations versus working for someone that had high expectations, and I rose to that level of expectation. So I would just say, don't let anyone hold you back. Have high expectations. Go where you're valued. If someone isn't valuing you, you don't have to leave the company, but you can certainly request that you work for someone different. There's so many different opportunities in companies to do something different. So just keep challenging yourself and keep going. And I would say the other big thing, and I wish I would have known about WIM sooner in my career, is and as women, we tend to isolate ourselves, right? We think we're the only one, and we protect. And I wish I would have surrounded myself with more women earlier on. And so I always give that advice. Join any employee resource group, any external organization that is for underrepresented people, because it does so much to help you realize you're not alone. It's not just you. You're not crazy, because we're stronger we're stronger together.
Definitely. I think, great advice. And now if you look to the employer perspective, is there specific advice, especially now that you're consulting and working very closely with automotive companies? Is there advice that you give kind of current companies that you're working with, and or maybe some companies participating today as it relates to, attracting and retaining and advancing female talent? Any advice there?
Yeah, definitely. Look in the unexpected places. So often we're reliant on our networks, who we know, who our friends know, and often we're not looking in those unexpected places. So just thinking about, I got plucked out of food service, right? I got this letter that showed up at my house. They were doing that back in the late 80s. So I think reaching out to some of the workforce development organizations. There's a lot of great organizations doing good work, and letting people know about the opportunities that you have in your company. Invite people into your company to see what you do, because people just may not be exposed to that. I had no idea. I thought I was going to make tools and dye them, right? Didn't know I could be an engineer. So it was that access to opportunity, that exposure to opportunity that got me into the field. And I know that there is all kinds of talent just hidden in unexpected places that we're not tapping. And women, right, we're almost 50% of the workforce, I think a little bit less now because of COVID, but women are meticulous. We're always wanting to learn, and we're loyal, and we're good at what we do. So take a chance and invest in a woman.
That's great advice. And I think you so poignantly put it, look for people in those unexpected places. And I think that's something we as a national organization year round really try to focus on, is there are so many women who are out of workforce who could be very much that perfect fit for so many of these open manufacturing positions, especially if you look at the rate of women graduating from college, those numbers of women who have different areas of expertise. And because of lots of different factors, they find themselves not working. And it's really, I think, become a priority for companies to figure out, how do they creatively reach these people? You got a letter at your home, what are the vehicles other companies can use to reach these women that are in places that don't know about manufacturing or don't know about registered apprenticeship programs. So, I think it's on all of us to figure out, how do we creatively reach these people? Hopefully, maybe a few stumble upon today's recorded webinar. But I think that the more that each of the companies participating today can do to reach out and to make individuals aware about these opportunities, the better.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just showing up at a conference like WIM, you just, not only the participants, but the network of the participants, who you have showing up at your conference, and all of the different connections that they have. So I just think it's showing up at those conferences, inviting people in, like I said before, and letting people know who you are, what your values are, what you stand for, and what the opportunities are in your company.
So as we look at I don't see any additional questions here in the chat. So I'll pose just a final one or two before we wrap up our discussion on registered apprenticeship programs today. But, as you look and reflect on, the kind of favorite parts of your apprenticeship program, what would you say were the biggest benefits for you as an apprentice? Lifelong benefits.
Lifelong benefits, it's having that skill that I still use today. I can fix something in the house. I don't always do that, but I can do it. So it's having that lifelong skill that no one can take away, and the knowledge that I can figure anything out, right? It's that skill I learned as a die maker, not only the hands-on stuff, but being able to read a print and figure something out. That the power that I feel from that is that's pretty special. So I would say that is definitely something that I loved about my apprenticeship. The other thing I loved about my apprenticeship was the community. And looking back at those pictures, I had a lot of fun. I mean, that group of individuals is down to earth. They're real. And I really love those guys. So that would be the second thing. And then the third thing, the money was great, and I walked away with no debt. So that would be the three things.
Yeah. No debt's a good thing.
Yes,
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Cheryl, it was great to talk with you today. I so appreciate you being so open and honest and transparent, and sharing your story of your apprenticeship journey, and then as well, kind of your current work that you're doing. How can people get connected with you outside of today's webinar?
Yeah, well, you can find me on LinkedIn. The website is automotivediversity.org. My email is Cheryl, CHERYL, @automotivediversity.org. And, every second Tuesday of the month, we have a free info session. So anyone's welcome to come. We're going to be doing something on the 12th called Women of Color in Automotive to learn. Come here and learn about that. So
Excellent.
all about building communities.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again, Cheryl, for joining us for our chat today. Again, this is part of a series that our Women in Manufacturing Association is powering throughout the year to, again, increase awareness around registered apprenticeship programs. As I think was shared in the chat, we do have an upcoming spring webinar that will follow as the next in our series, which is on Registered Apprenticeship Program Best Practices with Dr. Susan Emmerich from BASF. This program will be held on Tuesday, May 3rd at 2 p.m. Eastern. And we've made it or tried to make it pretty convenient. You can scan this QR code and that will directly take you to the registration link for that program. Again, these are recorded assets as well. So if you weren't able to listen to the entirety of today's program, this session has been recorded and will be in our virtual learning library that you can access at any time upon logging into your Women in Manufacturing profile at womeninmanufacturing.org. So again, thanks for participating in today's webinar. Thank you again, Cheryl. And again, praise to the great work that you and your organization are doing year round to celebrate and encourage diversity in automotive in this industry. And again, please reach out to us, myself or Jen Amber. And if any of you have additional questions about how your company may be able to establish and or strengthen a registered apprenticeship program at your company. So again, thanks so much for participating. Have a great day. And we'll be back in touch and be present here in May for our next session. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Take care. Have a great day.
Bye.